we will, this presentation will be made available pretty shortly thereafter, and we will share the recording, of course, with anybody who signed up. I also wanted to let you know that I will be moderating the chat and keeping an eye on that. We're going to keep questions until the end, so fear not, but you can type them in as you're thinking of them, and then we will either read them out or give you the opportunity to unmute if you would like to ask your question directly in your own voice. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker. So Jacco Zwetsloot is a Seoul-based researcher and podcast host who has studied North Korean propaganda for more than 2 decades. He first encountered DPRK comic books during a 2010 visit to Pyongyang, and later wrote his master's thesis in Korean studies at Leiden University on the topic. He hosts the twice-weekly NK News podcast, and I'm going to pop the link to that in the chat. And Jacco, you can take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mara, for the kind introduction. Yeah, so my title today is Cataloging the Uncatalogued, North Korean Comics and Graphic Novels. First of all, yeah, as Mara kindly introduced me, my name is Jacco Zwetsloot. I host the NK News podcast, all about North Korea. I interview experts, new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. You can find it on nknews.org or Spotify or YouTube or wherever else. Today, I'm speaking for myself, not for the company. And I'm a hobbyist researcher on North Korean comic books and Korean propaganda leaflets with a master's degree in Korean studies from Leiden University. And I do not claim to own any North Korean comics myself, and that's because I'm based here in South Korea, where under the National Security Law of 1949, it is illegal to distribute or promote material that praises the system or the leaders of North Korea. So all of this research today is based on looking at collections in universities around the world, including here not universities, institutions around the world, including here in South Korea. All right, so today I'll be talking about what is a North Korean comic book, what's the history, what are the basic themes, where are they sold, what kind of information can we find from a North Korean comic book, and why did I bother 12 years ago to start creating this database that I'm sharing with the world and that I hope people will help me to fill in. All right, so Kurimchek, comic books by another name. So first of all, I've forgotten to thank my host today, the Comic Studies Society Research Librarians Cohort Forum. So thank you for inviting me to speak today on this 12-year-long hobby project, which is still a work in progress. Okay, let me go back into it now. Yeah, so those of you who are here probably have heard of Japanese word manga before, from the Sino-Japanese characters there on the screen, which literally translates as whimsical pictures, but basically it's the Japanese word for comic strip or comic book. South Korea has the same originally Chinese characters, Sino-Korean characters. In South Korean, they're read as manhwa. China has manhwa as well. But in North Korea, that same word, manhwa, tends to be used only for satirical cartoons, and that's mostly cartoons which make fun of South Korea, with some exceptions. So here at the top right, we can see Pungja manhwa, which means literally satirical comic strip. And so that's the context in which manhwa is usually used in North Korea. So the most common term in North Korea for a comic book is kurimchek, which literally means picture book. So if I was to say in South Korea, if I were to talk about kurimchek in South Korea, South Koreans would expect me to be talking about a book full of simply pictures, a picture book. But in North Korea, this is the word they use for a comic book. And there's an example of a comic book with the word kurimchek up in the top left. Now, we have some problems that become quickly apparent, and the first one is when we're writing about North Korean comic books in English, what romanization system should we be using? So the Korean language is written with its own alphabet, that has two competing names because there are two competing Koreas. There's a North Korea and a South Korea. So the alphabet is known as Hangul in South Korea, but the same writing system, the same alphabet, is known as Choseongul in North Korea. There are also several systems of romanization that are competing. There is the most famous one is the McCune-Reischauer system. So Kurimchek written in that system would be spelt like this, with the apostrophe after the CH to show aspiration. North Korea has a revised McCune-Reischauer system where it doesn't use the apostrophe to show aspiration. So Kurimchek would be written like that. And in South Korea, they have their own revised romanization system where Kurimchek would be written like so, with no diacritic mark above the U and with an initial G rather than an initial K. So I'll be sticking in this presentation today with North Korea's system for spelling Kurimchek. Okay, now that we've got that straight, so Kurimchek, it's a very broad tent. It's a wide label, and it's literally hard to judge a book by its cover. And that is because Kurimchek incorporates both illustrated storybooks with drawings or paintings. And so here's an example of that. You've got one picture with a couple of paragraphs of text below it. It also includes multi-cell comic books with speech bubbles like we are used to seeing in the Western world. So both of these are called Kurimchek in North Korea. You can also find hybrid books, which is a book that might have 4 or 6 different stories. Some of them will be in one format and some of them will be in the other format. And so that's what I call a hybrid book. So the conclusion is there's really no way to know without looking inside whether any individual Kurimchek is a comic format Kurimchek or a non-comic form Kurimchek. There are also other labels that are used on North Korean comic books or illustrated storybooks, and they include Kurim Iyagi, or literally picture story, Pungja Manhwa, which we saw earlier, that's a satirical cartoon, Hwansang Kurimchek, which is a fantasy comic strip, Kwahak Hwansang Kurimchek, which is a science fantasy comic book or a science fiction comic book. Here's an example of that. Yumoa Kurimchek, or humorous comic book. Hwesang Kurimchek, which is a reminiscence comic book. Kurimurobon Joseon Ryoksa, or Korean history seen through pictures. And Donghwa Manhwa, which is like a fairy tale comic book, and there's an example of that one, the Clever Hedgehog book. So I guess we should really look at the definition. How does North Korea define Kurimchek? And I'm going to ask for your indulgence here. Bear with me, because I've got a little bit of a longish definition to read. This is perhaps the longest definition I've seen of comic books from North Korea. This is actually from the official North Korea published Korea Encyclopedia that came out in 1995. So this is what a Kurimchek is, according to that encyclopedia. A publication that conveys its content chiefly through pictures. A Kurimchek is, by nature, picture-based so that what it seeks to express can be grasped intuitively with brief text to explain the images. Accordingly, a Kurimchek is composed in a plain, easy-to-understand manner, more so than publications grounded in text. Kurimchek depict, through pictures, subject matter that is both novel and educational, encompassing all phenomena of nature and society, as well as human creative activity. In doing so, Kurimchek possess a persuasive power that enables readers to see the message directly with their eyes and to feel it. Kurimchek are aimed at a broad readership from young children to senior citizens and are edited and published in a wide variety of contents and formats. They not only educate workers, youths, and children, but also help broaden their knowledge of nature and society. To produce a good Kurimchek, one must select content that lends itself to pictorial representation and draw the images so effectively that the intended message is conveyed intuitively while compressing the explanatory text to keep it brief. Now, this incredibly long and arduous text to read is also equally long and arduous in Korean. It uses so many words to effectively say really very little. But some of the important points in there will become salient later on, particularly about the educational function of a Kurimchek. And this cover here that I'm showing, this is the cover of one of my favorite North Korean comic books, A Sick and Twisted World. It's volume 1 of a 7 or 8 volume series that shows North Koreans how bad conditions are in the outside world and why North Koreans shouldn't even think about going there. So, having now looked at the definition of Kurimchek from a North Korean encyclopedia, we should see what the leader of North Korea, the past leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-il, had to say. Kim Jong-il, the second leader of North Korea, during his lifetime, wrote a lot of prescriptive texts about cultural production. So he wrote a book in 1992 called On Juche Literature, which is also available in English translation. In that book, however, he had absolutely nothing to say about graphic novels or comic books. In the same year, he published another book called On Fine Art, in which he said very little about comic books in a section on graphic arts. And I'll show you that section in translation. The forms of illustration need to be diverse. We must also make colorful the binding that can be likened to the face of the book, and develop the comic strip genre. This little snippet of a sentence here, these few words, that's all he said. And in the original Korean, the words used for comic strip here is Ryonsok Kurim Hyongshik, literally sequential picture format. That's all that Kim Jong-il ever said or wrote on comic books. So we have to fast forward 11 years to another book that came out in 2003. And it's a book that the translation of the title is A New Turn in Graphic Arts. And this is a book that I had the displeasure of reading. It's 127 pages of text with not a single illustration or photo, despite being a book all about graphic arts. So it's all text-heavy description. And in this book it says, sequential pictures literally connect frames sequentially so that children can be drawn into the story world in a fun way. Sequential Kurimchek have various contents in various formats, raising the utility of books. That's it. So, what I did, having read that book, is I drew this organizational chart to try to plot where are sequential Kurimchek or comic strips and comic books, where do they fit into the world of North Korean literature and art. So you'll see at the top right there, we've got the overarching umbrella term, literature and arts, which divides into art and literature and divides further and divides further and divides further. And at the very, very bottom right, in red, you can see sequential Kurimchek. What does all this mean? I think it means that Kurimchek are not really given a high priority in North Korean cultural instructions from either the leader or from the cultural bureaucracy. In fact, I've seen no North Korean books on comic books at all. And I've even seen very, very few journal articles on comics. And so it's perhaps not very, it's not a genre that's taken very seriously. It's also interesting how little crossover there is between North Korean comics and North Korean animations. And you'll see children's animation comes much higher in this organization chart. And I think there's a lot more time and energy and money and resources spent on producing animation. So I really feel that I'm in a niche area, not only of Korean studies, but of North Korean studies. Okay, so a little bit about the history of North Korean comic books. First of all, before there were comics, in the Japanese colonial era, so from 1905 to 1945, Korea was under the control of Japan, and basically from 1910 it was annexed into Japan and became a province of the Japanese Empire. During that period, Korean illustrators were trained in the Japanese system. Some illustrators went to Japan, studied in Tokyo and in other major cities, and learned how to draw there. And they were drawing and producing artworks for children's books and newspapers. Then, in 1945, at the end of the Second World War, Korea was liberated from Japan by the Allies, and Korea was divided into two by the Soviet Union and the United States. 3 years later, in 1948, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, that's the official name of North Korea, was founded. And many of those artists who had been trained in Japan, who were dedicated to socialism or communism and wanted to help build up the system in North Korea, they moved to North Korea, and they began to use comics as a tool of politics. So during the Korean War, there were quite a lot of propaganda leaflets that used comic book art. And then later on after the war, there was the satirical magazine Hwasal, published during the 1950s. The U.S. Congressional Library has a good collection of this magazine, much of which I believe is now digitized and available online through the U.S. Congressional Library's website. Here are some photographs of some cartoons used on propaganda leaflets during the Korean War by North Korea in an attempt to convince the soldiers on the South Korean side that they're on the wrong side and to basically give up and switch sides. And most of those are single frame cartoons, or at least they're individual, but this one is an actual comic strip where we see this tells the story of a South Korean soldier named Chilsung, who is beaten and then starved, and then he is injured. He loses his leg during the Korean War, and ultimately he ends up a beggar. So it's a very sequential story that tells a simple storyline, a clear story. So now to talk about the books. After the Korean War, the first and the oldest North Korean kurimchek that I've seen is from 1957. It's called Honggyongre. The book is named after the title character. Although the cover says it was published in 1956, it was actually published in 57. This is an illustrated storybook. It's not actually a comic. And the designation is kurim iyagi, or picture story, rather than kurimchek, or picture book. And this is a designation, kurim iyagi, that is used sporadically and inconsistently throughout Korean comic book history until at least 1997. It has color illustrations, but alas, I have only black and white photocopies. So I'll just show you the cover page, Honggyongre, and there you can see. Actually, it's behind the stickers. You can't see it, but it says Kurim Miyagi, picture story. And here's a typical page from that book. And this is typical of the format of many non-comic format kurimchek. One large picture taking up half or more than half of the page, and then a big slab of text below. So certainly not what we in Western comic studies would call a comic strip. Then we go forward to 1965, and Dr. Know-It-All is the title of the first true comic book that I've seen from North Korea. This one has 4 color illustrations. Its designation is Kwahak Manhwa, or science comic, rather than kurimchek. And Kwahak Manhwa, or science comic, is a designation that appears only 4 times in my database of 1500 kurimchek. Here's the cover of it from 1965. And here's a typical page, 4 equal-sized cuts per page with speech balloons and colored pictures. And this is a book that sort of teaches the principles of using chemistry in agriculture. So it's about the making of chemical fertilizer, not natural fertilizer, and herbicides and pesticides to basically help to feed the people by growing a healthy crop of rice or barley or turnips or whatever the particular crop happens to be. So oh, and by the way, from the cover you can see that it looks like it's volume 1. I've never seen a subsequent volume. I'm not sure if there are any subsequent volumes. It was a very, very rare find, this one. Now, the top publishers, North Korea, every book, every film produced in North Korea is a state-produced piece of art. And the state has a number of different publishing houses, more than 10. And these are the top 5 publishers by number of books printed as they're listed in my comic book database. So the number 1 publisher by far is Kumsong Youth Publishing, also known by its translated name as Gold Star Youth Publishing, and it has 478 books in my database. After that is the Korea Publications Export and Import Corporation, then Arts and Literature Publishing House, Working People's Organizations Publishing House, and way, way down the back there is Korea Art Publishing House. So there's a bunch of publishers, but yeah, they're all controlled by the state, so there's some redundancy there. Okay, so what are the major themes that these books cover? First of all, what about art for art's sake? We saw earlier that Kim Jong-il and the sorry, not Kim Jong-il, but the Korea Encyclopedia said that kurimchek have the function of educating readers. Well, Kim Jong-il wrote in 1975 in his book on future-oriented ideas on literature and art, literature and the arts are a powerful weapon of the party in realizing the party's policies and educating the worker masses in the communist revolutionary spirit. So that's pretty clear. But just to reinforce that, 5 years later, in a book that was published for UNESCO in Paris, there's a book called The Cultural Policy in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, written by some experts, some cultural bureaucrats. And that book says, we are wary of the principle of art for art's sake, the naturalistic tendency to recognize only the artistic value of a work to the detriment of its ideological significance. We have achieved the just proportion of ideological and artistic values in our literary and artistic works. So it's very clear. North Korean comic books cannot be simply for fun. They must have also an educational and/or ideological purpose to serve. So, that being said, what are some of the themes that are taught in comic books for younger readers? First of all, we see a lot of life lessons through anthropomorphized animals. These are cute animal characters that walk and talk like humans. Then we also have basic lessons of loyalty, communist ethics, morality, spy hunting. It's a popular theme in young comic books. This is a page from one small spy hunter book where the spy in this case looks a bit like Frankenstein's monster with a mustache to me. Also, traffic safety is taught in some of these books, health. So these are some of the typical themes for younger readers. Not so political, but certainly clear messages. Now, for older readers, things get a little bit more political. We see Japanese colonial era lessons where the Japanese are absolutely the ultimate evil on God's earth. Pre-modern Korea and its ills, where Korean society was divided between landholders and servants or slaves. Evils of the outside world. I already showed you the cover of the book, A Sick and Twisted World. Here's a page from Volume 1 of A Sick and Twisted World that shows and criticizes how women in South Korea engage in boxing as a sport that is clearly disapproved of in this comic book. The Korean War is also a very popular theme in North Korean comics because they enable the comic book to engage, to show all the four major character types. Good Koreans, basically North Koreans, bad Koreans or South Koreans, race traitors, evil Americans, and even more evil Japanese characters. They're all covered in Korean War. Science fiction, there's a few science fiction comic books. Here's a nice page from one of them. And also a bit of magical realism. Another theme that is covered, and one question that I often get asked is, what about the leader, Kim Jong-il, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-un, the current leader? So yes, loyalty to leader and the party is a theme that's clearly taught, or at least referred to, I mean, at least implied in these books, but you never see an image of the leader themselves. They're never shown. And I believe that that is because comic book art, any kind of a caricature, is a simplification of an actual image. And that is not, North Korea is very particular about protecting the dignity of the leader. And so comic book art is not considered to be a dignified enough form of art, and therefore those leaders cannot be portrayed in them. They're only portrayed in mosaics or murals or in socialist realist art or in photographs or statues, but never in comic book art. Okay, here is, I mentioned before that magical realism is one of the themes of North Korean comic books. And sure enough, here's a comic book from 2013. This, the title here is The Typhoon is Tamed. And this tells the story of the Samjiyon, a North Korean ship that was sailing from Japan to North Korea with a load of North Korean passengers, and it gets caught in a typhoon. The telegraph operator sends a message back to North Korea asking for help. Kim Jong-il puts out the word, that the storm should be calmed, and lo and behold, it's a miracle. The storm is calmed, and the ship gets into port safely with everyone on board unharmed. And there in the red letters in the last frame, we see, "Long live the great leader Kim Il-sung, and long live the great leader Kim Jong-il." So that's a great example of magical realism from one of these North Korean comic books. There are lots of other ones in that particular series. So where can one find North Korean comic books? Okay, first of all, chiefly they're sold within North Korea, obviously, because they're mainly made for a domestic audience, a domestic market. So there are state-run bookshops. An example, a very famous example, is the Foreign Languages Bookshop on Kim Il-sung Square in Pyongyang, and that's where I was taken in 2010, where I first encountered North Korean comic books. So a lot of tourists and visitors to North Korea are taken to this bookshop, and that's where you can find them. They're also circulated in a secondary market through privately run markets. And here's a photograph taken from Flickr of a street market in the city of Haeju, very close to the demilitarized zone with South Korea. And it's showing all kinds of books, and some of those are comic books, particularly on the top shelves. And there's a young boy having a look at one of those comic books. They're also sold outside North Korea, probably still in Japan and in Beijing and in Seoul. So in Japan, there is a group of resident pro-Pyongyang Koreans. They used to have offline bookstores, but the last ones closed 10 years ago. But they still have an online website, rainbow-trading.co.jp, that sells North Korean materials, as well as Anyong Books, run by Chosun Shinbo, a pro-Pyongyang newspaper run by resident Japanese in Japan, resident Koreans living in Japan. In China, by the way, this photograph is not from China. This is actually the photograph of the Foreign Languages Bookshop on Kim Il-sung Square in Pyongyang. In China, there is the Korea Publications Export and Import Corporation. It trades under Beijing Sunyong Scientific Technology Trade. They have a book depository in Beijing where they sell not just comic books, but a lot of books and DVDs and materials from North Korea. They used to have two active websites, dprk-book.com and korea-public.com, but both of those are offline now, so you'll have to, I think, try to reach them through email at khibj321@163.com or the same thing at gmail.com. They have an inactive Facebook. It's been active, I think, since the start of the pandemic. Apparently, they're active on WeChat, but they have multiple IDs that seem to change, and I don't use WeChat, so I can't be of much help there. There's also some older second-hand comic books can be found at the Chinese website kongfz.com, which is kind of like a second-hand, like an eBay for second-hand books in China. Here's another photograph taken from the inside of the Foreign Languages Bookshop in Pyongyang. In South Korea, believe it or not, there's a company, asiajournal.co.kr, and you might think, well, hang on, how is that possible under the South Korean national security law? This company is actually licensed by the South Korean government to import North Korean materials only for approved, that is state-sanctioned South Korean libraries. So this is the one channel that is allowed by the South Korean government to bring in North Korean material. And it's not legally permissible to buy or sell these books privately within South Korea. So, but overseas libraries, like institutional libraries in other countries, may be able to contact asiajournal.co.kr and order their books through there. So what's some of the basic information that can be found on a typical Kurimchek? So on the front cover, you've got your designation, whether it's a Kurimchek or a Kurimiyagi or a Punghwa Manhwa or whatever else, a series name and a volume number if it's part of a series, a title, the publisher's name, the year of publication, and maybe an author or illustrator's name. This book that I'm showing you here doesn't have an author or illustrator's name and is not part of a series. Then on the back cover, or just inside the back cover, is the colophon. And that has a lot more information. It'll show you the title, the author, the illustrator or illustrators, editor, the cover artist, the proofreader, publisher and printer name, publishing date and issue date, also the product code, and then the ISBN number. From about 2013, North Korean comics started to get ISBN codes, and now they all have ISBN codes. Before 2012, they didn't have it. Here's another colophon from a pre-ISBN code era. This one will show you the volume number, the original author, because this comic book was adapted from a novel. So the original name of the original author, the name of the story adapter, or adaptors in this case, adapters. Maybe there are some consultants or experts. So some books have maybe scientific consultants or psychological experts. The computer layout, number of copies printed. In this case, you'll see at the bottom there, this book, there were 13,000 copies printed of this book, and the price. And at the bottom, you can see there the price of this book originally was 121. And some books, some of the comics have a character intro page, so you can see a quick overview of the names of the major characters. It's not very common, but I like to see it in some of the books. An overview. It's very easy to tell who the good and the bad guys are just by how they're drawn, right? So the top three characters are good people, and two of the three in the middle are bad guys, and the three at the bottom are very bad guys. And here's some other character intro pages from another comic book series. We see all the bad people on the page on the right-hand side, including Americans and Japanese and race traitor South Koreans. So, what are some common challenges when looking into or trying to research North Korean comics? Not every book has an author's name, so there are some blanks in my database on that. Sometimes that's because the story originally is said to come from Kim Il-sung or Kim Jong-il himself, and so the book gets no author's name. The job titles are not always consistent. Series do not always continue. There are some cases where there's a volume 1, but I've never seen a subsequent volume. And it can be hard to get hold of other volumes even when they do exist. Prices are rarely available in books printed for export. I think that in many cases, North Korea prints two versions of comics, one for domestic circulation, in which the price is readily printed, and one version for overseas distribution to the Korean diaspora in China, Japan, and other countries, and that will not have a price shown in there. The imprint numbers are rare, and there's no official comprehensive catalogue. And more about that later on. And there's also no single institution in the world that has a complete collection of all North Korean comics. So that brings me to the question of why would I spend 12 years creating a database? Why do that? Why bother? Here's a snapshot of a screenshot of part of the database, and it's available to all at tinyurl.com/nkcomicsdb. That stands for North Korea Comics Database. So you'll find that there. It's a Google spreadsheet. So the original Google URL is much longer, of course. So that's why I made a tiny URL of it. And I started making this in 2012. And the reason was it was just a way to record those books that I had seen and which ones were comic type Kurimchek and which ones were not comic type Kurimchek. Also at the time, as I mentioned, there was no database or catalog existing except for individual university and other institutional holdings. So I wanted to have a universal one with all the books that existed. Also, another reason is the information is patchy, it's inconsistent, sometimes it's contradictory. So I try to get it all down in one place to make sense of it all. I was unfamiliar at the beginning with other institutional holdings, just with the one here in South Korea. And I had not yet come across North Korea's annual catalogs and almanacs. And I'll show you some examples of them. So here's one of the yearly catalogs. This is from 1996. So apparently they're published annually, although I've only seen 17 of these published between 1986 and 2018. So in 32 years, I've seen 17 of them. It's not a great number. They're sometimes bilingual. This 1996 edition is a bilingual one. They generally only list comic books from two publishers, and that's Kumsong, the Golden Star, and the other one being Arts and Literature Publishing House. Details are scant and sometimes contradictory. There's usually no or very, very few pictures in these catalogs. And of course, you can't tell from the catalog, is this Kurimchek a comic style or not? You really have to see the book and look inside. And not all books published that year are listed. So there are some books that just don't appear in any catalogs. Here's a very useful exception, the 2016 catalogue of Korean publications. This is the only one that I've found in digital form online. So you can actually dig up, if you Google this, you'll find this as a PDF. It's a readily searchable PDF. So it's not just an image, it's actually optical character recognition. So you can go in there and search the text, which is very helpful. Now, in this particular book, Kurimchek are listed under juvenile books. So it's got various categories, including Kurimček, all under that umbrella. 37 pages of titles are shown in this book, which is the most out of any catalog I've ever seen, from 7 publishing houses, including a cover photograph for each book, and books from 1990 onwards are listed. So it's almost 26 years worth of books published here, but still there's a lot that's missing. There's a lot of books that are published in that period from 1990 to 2016 that are not there. Nevertheless, I show you here, here's a screenshot of the first page. You'll see there, this is section 16 of that thick catalog, juvenile books. This is the section where all the Kurimček are found, but it's not just Kurimček. It also has fairy tales, which is really, it's not even one picture per page in some cases, and illustrated nursery rhymes. So I'm not sure why they've all been bunched together, but it simply adds grist to my mill, the mill of my argument that Kurimček don't really have a high priority in North Korea as a genre. They're just thrown in with other genres and categorized under juvenile books. The only Kurimček on this page is the one at the top, 1932, and that's not a comic book style at all. It's mostly text with one picture maximum per page. Then we have the Korea Literature and Arts Almanac, and this is a thick A4 size hardback book that is also published annually in Korean only, not at all bilingual. I've seen 24 of these almanacs published between 1998 and 2021. They generally list books from anywhere between 1 to 3 publishing houses, so sometimes it's a little bit more than the catalog. But still the details are scant and sometimes contradictory, and also you don't know whether a book is actually comic style or not. And not all books published in any given year are listed in these almanacs, and sometimes there are books listed in the almanac that I have not actually seen in a collection. So there are some in my database that I've got from the almanacs that I don't know them to be physically held in any collection anywhere in the world. So it's all very confusing, a lot of contradictory information. And in this book, as I said, it's a big, thick book. In over 500 pages, Kurimček are added like an afterthought in the very, very last section. Here's an example of such a page at the very back of the book. Took a photograph of it, and you'll see there at the top left, there's that word, Kurimček. And then the left-hand column has the titles of a bunch of Kurimček published in that year, and this year in this case is 2007. Then the next column has, it's divided into, each cell is divided into 2. The top is the author, and the bottom is the illustrator. You'll see the first title there has no name of an author or illustrator at all, which is nonsensical. The next column has a short 1 to 2 line summary of the contents of that book. Next column shows the number of pages. The next column shows the size of the comic book, and they generally come in 2 standard sizes, certainly in this particular year, and only 2 publishing houses are mentioned. At the top and the 2 at the bottom from the Kumsong or Gold Star Youth Publishing Company, and the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the middle from the Literature and Arts Publishing House. So this is where I now have to change the screen that I'm sharing to get into the database itself. And here it is. Mara, can you just verify that I am showing the database?
You are.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll just walk you very quickly through the details that I've tried to put in here. As I've said, I've got an entry for over 1,500 comic books now. And so we start off, of course, with the Korean title, an English translation. If that book has appeared in one of the bilingual catalogs and it comes with an English translation in the catalog, I put it in quotation marks. Otherwise, I've made my own translation of the title with no quotation marks. Then, which catalog does it appear in? What's the format? Is it an illustrated story or is it an actual comic book? What's the designation? Is it a Kurimček, like we see here? Is it a Donghua Manhwa or something else? What are the dimensions? And then here, take, for example, this book. The dimensions are 125 by 185 millimeters, but it's confusing because the catalog that it appeared in says that it should be a different size. Then, is it a series? If it's part of a series, what's the number? Who's the publisher? What's the print? What is the print shop? what's the date of printing, the date of issuing, how many pages, the price, the product code, the ISBN, and here are all the people who are involved in making it. Oops, I seem to have erased that one, that cell by mistake. I'll have to go back and fix it later on. But there's the name of the author, the illustrators, the editor, and so on. And then I've put some additional information later on to try to show, is it based on an original story, how many copies are printed, what's the target age, what's the time setting, the place setting, are there any nationalities, is there a character page, names of any foreign characters, and what's the themes that are covered in this book. And then here, where book exists. So this is where I've listed every institutional library that I was able to find on WorldCat to show where that book is held. And then the last column, the other column, shows any additional information, and that might be, for example, the summary of that book as shown in the catalog or in the almanac. So sometimes it's in English, sometimes it's in Korean, or it could be a note about a message from the editors at the front of the book criticizing feudal society of the time, or it could be a note about how many stories are in that story, etc., etc. So there's a lot of information in here, a lot of columns, and I've tried to be as complete, but as you can see, there's a lot of gaps in here. And for 1,500 books, it certainly wasn't possible to physically look at each one of them. So in some of those cases, particularly the most recent ones where I've only seen their names in a catalog, I've no idea what the format is. I've no idea, is this an illustrated book or an actual storybook? Okay, I'll go back now to my PowerPoint. No, I've done it wrong. Screen 2. Ah, there we go. Mara, is that correct? Am I showing the PowerPoint again?
Yes, briefly it was on the presenter mode, but we're seeing the PowerPoint now.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so here are the institutional holdings. So the largest library in terms of North Korean Kurimchik, without question, is the one in Seoul in South Korea at the National Library of Korea. It's called the Information Center of North Korea. That has 810 of the 1,500 books in my database. Outside Korea, 7 of the top 10 libraries are in the USA. Columbia University, by far and away, the one with the largest. Well, actually, so Columbia University and University of Washington and Seattle are neck and neck in terms of the largest holdings. And then 2 of those libraries are in Europe. The one with the largest collection is in Leiden, where I did my master's. So they've got 491 Kurimchek. So what percentage of North Korean comics are in my database? There's no way to be sure. This is where we get into known unknown, or unknown unknowns, I should say, because I know that I have no idea how many comic books are published in any given year. Because as I've shown you, those catalogs and those almanacs are unreliable. They don't show everything. And sometimes they show things that I can't even verify. So there's no way to be sure. But I feel generally confident that over 75% of Kurimchek that are actually physically held in a collection outside North Korea that has an online catalog, that 75% of those books are listed. And I think that's a pretty conservative estimate. It may even be as close as 80 or 90%, because I have been fairly diligent in going through WorldCat and other online databases to try to add books to the database. There are some caveats, of course. There are inconsistent romanization systems, there are typos, mine and librarians, entering multi-volume books as one item, misidentification of a book as a Kurimchek when it's not, etc. Now, some of you might be wondering, what about e-comics or webtoons? Now, I have found some scanned comic books that have turned up as PDF files on tablet computers sold in North Korea. Here's an example of one of those. And I've also found a small number of ebooks that were on now defunct North Korean websites, targeting mostly diaspora and South Korean readers. And here's an example of one of those. And there were some of these defunct websites like DPRK Today and Uri Minzoki. They had some comic books targeting South Korean readers that were specifically made for those websites. But these are all offline now, and here's an example of one of those. And that's actually a comic book that came out, I think, 2 years ago, a serialized comic book making fun of then South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and his wife and the shaman who they allegedly consulted before making major decisions. But as far as I can see, there does not appear to be a thriving domestic e-comic or webtoon industry in North Korea yet. That may well change. Now, what's my Moby Dick? What's the white whale that I'm still chasing after all these years? It's this book. Shinyom Gwatamjong is the Korean title. The designation is Kurimchek. I've translated the title in English as The Detective and His Unshakable Conviction. It's not listed in any catalogue or almanac, despite the fact that we can see at the bottom left, it is published by Kumsong Youth Publishing House, the publishing house that publishes the most North Korean Kurimchek. So it's crazy that it doesn't appear in any catalogue. It's held in no library collection anywhere in the world, not even here in South Korea. There's at least 6 volumes, because this one we're looking at, this is a picture of volume 6. The only one that I've seen is held in a private collection. I do not own this book, but I've seen it in a private collection. It was published, this particular volume was published in 2006. So this series was published in and around that year. I've made requests to Beijing and Pyongyang, and I think also to Tokyo, to try to get copies of this book in vain. Just can't get it. And an article that I saw in a pro-Pyongyang newspaper published in Japan mentioned 10 or more volumes. It also mentioned that this series was so popular that it was reprinted, and yet can't seem to get a hold of it. It's amazing how hard it is. So that's the title that I keep looking for. How do I know that it's really out there? Well, remember that photograph that I showed you of the street library or the street market with the young boy? Have a look at the top shelf. I've zoomed in, I've clarified it a bit. There's that exact book, multiple copies of it up there in the city of Jeju. Here's some pages from inside that book. I took some photographs of the copy that I saw in the private collection. As you'll see, it contains an interesting mixture of martial arts moves, mainly on the left page, with a lot of long expository text and monologuing on the right page. Same with this double page spread here. The whole left page is all biffo and thudding and whack, and on the right side it's a lot of monologuing. So the search goes on. I put the link up for a bit of crowdsourcing. Hopefully people will be able to help to fill in some of the gaps, either librarians or enthusiasts or other researchers. So tinyurl.com/nkcomicsdb. That's basically it from me. Special thanks go to Nadia Kreft-Mishkovsky, who is the subject librarian of Korean studies and also Japanese studies at Leiden University Library. She was a great help to me when I was doing my master's degree and even afterwards, and also encouraged me to wrap up my database project and put it out there so that people can use it and hopefully add to it. And she's the one who helped me to distribute this database around to institutional libraries around the world. Also, big thanks to Benjamin Joanneau, Associate Professor at Hongik University. He has an excellent database of North Korean feature films that you'll find at the website urlz.fr/P_I_W_D. And I was inspired by his database to make my database a bit better, and also to share it, to get it out there. And a final thanks go to Michael Spavor, a fellow hobbyist and who shares my interest in and enthusiasm for North Korean comics, with whom I traveled to Pyongyang back in 2010, the very first time that I went there. So thanks to all of you for your attention, and I'd like to welcome questions now.
Thank you so much, Jacco. I know you are not looking at the chat or unable to see it. I think you can see all the applause, but I will also say there's a lot of very positive comments in the chat. People are encouraging you to turn this presentation into a scholarly article. We do have some questions that are already in the chat, so we will go through those first, and then if there's still time, I have some as well. But first, Bianca asked the first question, and Bianca, would you like to unmute and ask yourself? If not, I can read it. Okay, having paused a bit, I will read it. So the question is, what's the earliest Kurumchek you've found meant for children? And how does the content in earlier Kurumchek for children compare to more recent ones you've acquired?
I'm assuming here that she means for younger readers, because most of the Kurim Czech are pitched at children, although they do differentiate between younger and older. So I'm going to go for younger readers. I think that earliest one that I showed from 1965, Dr. Know-It-All, teaching about fertilizer and herbicide and pesticide, that is definitely the earliest one for younger readers, because they can read short, simple texts before the before longer ones, obviously. How do they differ, the earlier ones from the later ones? I would say that there's not a lot of difference. Not a lot of North Korean comic books are based in the here and now. They're either written in a kind of an eternally present sort of a neverland, like the world of anthropomorphized animals. There is no year, there's no history. It's sort of a contextless time, or they're written in an eternal past. So lots of books from the Korean War period or from the Japanese period. So there's not a lot of time, a real sense of time and place in, well, place there is, but not a real sense of time in a lot of these comics. So the themes tend to be quite consistent through the decades. Loyalty and good behavior and ethics are always reinforced in the books for younger readers. I hope that answers Bianca's question sufficiently.
Let me scroll. Yes, you got a thank you.
Right.
The next questions come from Dahlia. Dahlia, do you want to ask yourself, or would you like me to read them?
I can ask really quickly.
Great.
Hi, Jacco.
Hi.
I was just curious. I had two questions about maybe how the books were used. So, have you ever seen maybe the comic books were used in an education curriculum or in another diverse context like homeschooling, maybe during a school off break or in special education? And then the second question would be if you ever read the state newspaper and if you've ever seen a comic strip in one of the newspapers, maybe from the Korean Workers' Party or any other news boards.
Okay. So for the first question there, I'm not aware of how these books are used in or outside North Korean schools. That there's I've not come across anything that suggests that they are used in the school curriculum. So I assume that they're probably something that kids read in their free time, like we saw in that photograph from the town of Jeju. But I could be wrong on that one. There's very little information on and very little research done in Korean on things like reader surveys, like where did you read a comic book, or were you encouraged to read them or discouraged from reading them? I found very little information on that, and I don't have the wherewithal, the resources to go out there and interview a large number of North Korean defectors who have grown up in North Korea and who have that sort of information. And as for your second question, and I did have an answer, but I'm blanking on it now. Remind me what it was again, please, Dahlia.
If you've read a state newspaper, maybe
Yeah,
from
right.
the
Okay.
KWP or another board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So the Rodong Shinmun, of course, is the most famous North Korean state newspaper. And I haven't looked at a lot of copies of them, but enough copies to see that the one that I looked at certainly had no comic strips. I don't think it's a regular feature of state-run newspapers, or at least not the one that I had access to. But in some of the state-run magazines, like the monthly journals, Cholima, for example, often has comics in there, and sometimes they've even been like a serialized month by month or sometimes bi-monthly comic strip story told over multiple issues. But most of the time they're just like a single strip told over one page. So in the magazines, yes, sometimes also in Choson Yosong, Korean Women, but I haven't seen them in newspapers. Thanks for your question.
Danton has the next question. Danton, would you like me to
Yeah,
ask?
sure.
Or...
I'll just ask it. Hello,
Wonderful.
Jacco. Yeah.
Hello, Danton.
So, absolutely. Excellent lecture. Really enjoyed it. With regard to publication of these comics in foreign languages or translation, what percentage of those of the books that you've cataloged would you say are available in foreign languages? And do you notice any pattern with regard to which books are chosen for publication in a foreign language?
Yeah, okay, great question. Thank you. I didn't cover that in the interview. almost nothing of North Korean comic book output or Kurimchek output is translated into any language, as far as I've seen. I'm not aware of them appearing in Chinese, in Japanese, in English, in Arabic, French, any of those languages. I have a very, very small number, 4, perhaps 5, Kurimchek that are non-comic style, so just the illustrated storybook style, which were published into English, so translated into and published in English back in the 1980s or 1990s, a very, very small number, and I've never seen any more. So I think they were exceptional. Maybe somebody at the state publishing house said, let's choose a few and translate them, but it certainly wasn't a pattern. Generally, most of their stuff is only published in the Korean language.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Catherine, would you like to ask your question? Okay, so I'm glad Catherine says that I can read this out loud, and I think it's very similar to the question I would have had, and I'm mindful of everyone's time, so if you'll indulge me, I'm going to kind of combine my question. So Catherine asks if there's a lot of author illustrators or are multiple individuals doing each aspect of the comic, which relates to my question, which is who are the creators and how are they getting trained and building community these days?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, okay, good question. Okay, so for my master's thesis at Leiden University, a bit of self-promotion back in 2015, and that thesis is, you know, if you Google my name and Leiden University, you'll be able to find that thesis for free reading. It's up as a PDF file on the internet. I focused on one particular author, illustrator, cover artist. His name is Chae Hyuk. Chae Hyuk was, to my mind, and still is, the best all-round North Korean comic book creator. He wrote the story. He drew all the pictures. He had, I think, a very the eye of a cinematographer. He was able to use different angles and low down and close-ups and high-ups. He was a lot more creative than any other North Korean artist I've seen in all my years. And he did all of the work himself. But in almost every other case, you'll find there's a very rigid division of labor. So somebody writes, and they're always a writer. Somebody illustrates, and they're always an illustrator. And many of those illustrators then do covers for other books. They may not do the cover art for their own book, but they'll do the cover art for other books. So you'll see the illustrators and cover artists, those names will cross-reference a lot in the database. But the artist doesn't often become the writer, and the writer doesn't often become the artist. And also there are a couple of proofreaders who seem to pop up all the time. So there are proofreaders that do the work, and a couple of the writers are also editors. But yeah, generally speaking, it's a rigid division of labor. Yeah, I think, does that answer the question, Mara?
Yes. We have one question. I'm gonna one more question. I'm gonna say this has to be the last one, just being mindful of people dropping out and your time. It must be 1 a.m. there by now.
Yeah, 1 a.m. Yeah.
So Michael asks, are you seeing any modern art influences, aka manga's large eyes, motion lines, etc., in more recent works?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. So I have seen some of the, and I think I've actually noted it in the database. Some North Korean comics have a very clear influence of Japanese manga art. So you know you can see that particularly in the way that the eyes are drawn and the faces are drawn. It's a clear giveaway that this is you know, this comic book artist has seen manga. Others look like they've been inspired by American comic book art. So Chae Hyuk, for example, the guy who did the 3 Korean war stories that I focused on for my master's thesis, doesn't look like Japanese comic book art or manga art that I'm familiar with, but it looks more like American sort of superhero style way of drawing, including the ways he shows movement and action. But he's quite rare in that, as I said, I think he's the best of all of them. But after the early 2000s, I've been unable to find any more work by him. So I'm not sure whether he died or retired early or whatever. But one thing is for sure, these North Korean comic book creators, they are given access to comic books and things from outside North Korea that the average North Korean doesn't get access to, right? So North Korean cannot simply go to the market and say, hey, I want to get that latest manga. Has it come over from Tokyo yet? That's not available to the average North Korean. But clearly, somebody in the cultural bureaucracy is making sure that these comic book artists are given access to these books so they can sort of learn how to draw, because some of that stuff is really quite close to Japanese and American styles, and some of it is quite an indigenous style. So it's really interesting to see just the sheer breadth of styles that are out there in North Korea.
Okay, well, that was a great question to end on. Thank you again for taking the time. This was a awesome lecture. I'm going to give Jason an opportunity to close us out with any last messages from the research librarian cohort, and then we will end for the day.
Yeah, so just 3 quick things. First, thank you to both Mara and Jacco. This was an amazing presentation. We know we wanted to do it over the summer, so I'm glad we got a chance to get it here in the fall. The second is in the link in the chat. We're actually putting the link to our website that we have actually gotten stood up. So if you're interested more to learning about the research librarian cohort, that is about who we are. And the last thing is, if you are interested in presenting something like Jacco just did, since we have so many attendees, feel free to reach out to basically the current board. We're on the People's tab of the website, and we would be happy to work with you to find the next event. So again, thank you so much for coming, everyone, and thank you, Jacco, so much for being so late, and thank you, Mara, for basically working with Jacco to make this happen. This was an awesome presentation, so thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Go and have a look at the database.
Yes, absolutely.